In the year 2000, one company made nearly half of every mobile phone sold on the planet. Not Samsung, not Apple, not Google. A company from Finland, a country most people couldn't find on a map. Nokia controlled 40% of the entire global mobile phone market. At its peak, Nokia was worth of $150 billion. They employed over 100k people across 120 countries. The Nokia 3310 alone sold 126 million units, becoming one of the most beloved objects humans ever made. Analysts called Nokia untouchable, politicians called it the pride of Europe, and Nokia itself called its position permanent. They were wrong. Within 13 years, everything was gone. The phone stopped selling, the engineers started leaving, and the company that once owned the world was sold for scraps. But the most shocking part of Nokia's story is not how they fell, it's that they could see it coming and choose to do nothing. To understand Nokia's fall, you first need to understand how unlikely their entire existence was. Nokia was not born as a technology company. It was born in 1865 as a paper mill on the banks of the Nokianvirta River in southern Finland. The founder, Fredrik Edstam, was a mining engineer who wanted to manufacture paper pulp. For the first century of its life, Nokia made paper, then rubber, then cables. In 1960, Nokia entered the electronic business almost by accident. In 1979, they formed a joint venture with a Finnish television company called Mobira. And in 1982, Nokia launched its first car phone. It weighed 9.8 kilograms, almost as much as a bowling ball. But nobody laughed because it worked. In 1992, Nokia made the decision that would define the next 2 decades. They sold off every other businesses, rubber, cables, paper, everything, and went completely all in one thing, mobile phones. At the time, analysts thought it was a reckless gamble. Within 5 years, Nokia was the most valuable technology company in Europe. A paper mill from Finland had become the most powerful phone company on earth. And nobody, not even Nokia, fully understand what they had built. By the late 1990s, Nokia had achieved something no technology company had ever done before. They had made mobile communication feel human. Their phones were simple, durable, and somehow felt like they were built specifically for you. Nokia's design language was years ahead of its competitors. The Nokia 3310 was dropped, sat on throne, and submerged, and it kept working. It became a cultural symbol of reliability in an unreliable world. Nokia's ringtones became the soundtrack of the early 2000s. Their Snake game was the most played game on earth before smartphones existed. In Finland, Nokia wasn't just a company, it was a national identity. At one point, Nokia accounted for over 25% of Finland's entire export revenue. The Finnish Prime Minister personally tracked Nokia's stock price every morning. They had 1800 engineers working exclusively on future phone concepts. The word Nokia had become synonymous with the word phone in dozens of languages. They were not just the market leader, they were the market. Here is the fact about Nokia that most people have never heard. In 2004, 3 full years before Apple launched the iPhone, Nokia engineers built a working touchscreen smartphone. It had internet browsing, an app ecosystem, and a capacitive touchscreen display. Nokia's engineers were excited. They knew what they had built. They presented it to Nokia's senior leadership with full confidence. The executives listened carefully, and then they made a decision that would haunt Nokia for the rest of its existence. They killed the project. The official reason was given that the touchscreen technology was not yet ready for mass production. But Nokia's own engineers told a very different story years later. The real reason was money, specifically the fear of cannibalizing Nokia's existing best selling phones. Nokia was making billions from its current lineup, and nobody wanted to risk disrupting that. So that prototype was buried in a filing cabinet somewhere in Espoo, Finland. 3 years later, Steve Jobs pulled what looked like a nearly identical concept out of his pocket and introduced it to the world as the iPhone. Nokia's engineers watched from their offices in Finland, watching the world discover something they had built first. Innovation is not just about inventing things, it's about having the courage to use what you have invented. What happened next is a part of Nokia's story that nobody talks about. In 2004, the same year Nokia buried their touchscreen prototype, a small startup came to Nokia with a proposal. That startup was Android. The founders of Android, Andy Rubin and his team, wanted Nokia to adopt their mobile operating system. Nokia's leadership met with the Android team and listened to the pitch. Nokia said no. The official reason: Nokia believed their own operating system Symbian was superior. They had invested billions in Symbian and were not willing to abandon it. What Nokia didn't know or refused to accept was that Symbian was already becoming useless. Android left the meeting and walked directly into the arms of Google. Google acquired Android for an estimated $50 million in 2005. 2 years later, Android became the operating system that would power the smartphone revolution. Today, Android runs over 3 billion devices worldwide. Nokia turned down the operating system that runs nearly 73% of all smartphones on Earth. In one meeting, Nokia had rejected both the touchscreen future and the software future. They had chosen a future that didn't exist anymore, and they didn't realize it until it was already too late. After the iPhone launched in June 2007, the mobile phone industry changed overnight. Consumers who had never thought about their phone software suddenly cared deeply. Nokia's response was delayed, confused, and ultimately fatal. Between 2007 and 2012, Nokia's market share collapsed from 40% to under 5%. In 5 years, they lost 35 percentage points of global market share. Their stock price fell from a peak of over 65 euros to under 2 euros. Billions of dollars of shareholder value evaporated in months. Nokia tried to launch touchscreen phones, but they were too slow, too clunky, and too late. Their operating system Symbian, designed for the button phone era, could not be adopted fast enough. App developers stopped building for Nokia. The app ecosystem that Apple and Google were building, Nokia had nothing to compete with. Senior engineers started quietly updating their resumes. Internal meetings became increasingly panicked and disconnected from reality. Nokia's leaders kept insisting they had a plan, while the plan kept failing. Meanwhile, Apple and Samsung were dividing the premium software market between them. Nokia was being squeezed from the top by Apple and from the bottom by cheap Android manufacturers. The empire that had taken 40 years to build was being dismantled in real time. In September 2010, Nokia did something desperate. They hired a CEO from Microsoft. His name was Stephen Elop, and he would become the most controversial figure in Nokia's history. 3 months into the job, Elop did something no Nokia executive had ever dared to do. He wrote an internal memo to every single Nokia employee. The memo began with a story about a man standing on a burning oil platform in the Northern Sea. The man had two choices: stay on the platform and burn, or jump into the freezing ocean. He jumped and survived. Alap's message was clear. Nokia was the man, the burning platform was their current strategy, and the ocean was the unknown. The memo leaked to the press within hours and became world news. In February 2011, Alap announced Nokia would abandon Symbian and partner exclusively with Microsoft Windows Phone. The partnership was supposed to create a third competitor to challenge Apple and Android. Instead, it confused Nokia's remaining customers and drove away the last of their developers. Windows Phone never gained meaningfully traction against iOS and Android. By 2012, Nokia was losing approximately $1 billion every single quarter. The company that had once funded Finland's economy was now burning throughout its cash reserves like a house on fire, and everyone inside Nokia knew the end was coming. On September 3, 2013, Microsoft announced it was acquiring Nokia's entire mobile phone division. The price was $7.2 billion. That sounds like a lot of money, until you remember Nokia was worth of $150 billion just 13 years earlier. Stephen Elop left Nokia to return to Microsoft with a $25 million severance package. Nokia's 32,000 phone division employees were transferred to Microsoft. The Nokia name disappeared from phones entirely. Microsoft rebranded the phones as Lumia and quietly discontinued the line in 2016. The engineers who had once been the pride of European technology went to work for Apple, Google, and Samsung. A company does not die at all once. It dies slowly, decision by decision, meeting by meeting, until one day there is nothing left. Nokia's story is not a story about losing to Apple. It's a story about what happens when a company confuses being the biggest with the being the best. Nokia had the engineers, but didn't listen to them. Nokia had the technology, but was too afraid to use it. It sounds like we have always done it this way. It sounds like we will address that in the next quarterly review. By the time Nokia decided to act, the smartphone era had already chosen its winners. The most expensive mistake in Nokia's history was not a bad product. It was a culture that punished honesty. If this story made you think differently about the companies you use every day, subscribe to Empire Files. Every week, one empire, one story, one lesson the world forgot to learn.